Hello and welcome. Welcome to the 54th lecture. Today we are in continuation to our discussion in this week on global climate governance. We are going to discuss today on Glasgow Climate Pact. So, we call it Glasgow Climate Pact. The 53rd we talked about Paris Agreement, 52nd we talked about Kyoto Protocol. So, look at the terminology which is connected to the name of the place and also has a linkage to the COP. So, to discuss about this, we will cover the following concepts in terms of the overview. This Glasgow happened in 2021 in Glasgow, UK against the COP26 meeting. So, it is one of the important COPs. So, we will discuss what is the Glasgow Climate Pact here. We will also try to understand the key pillars of this pact which was discussed in COP26. We will discuss about the IPCC assessments and necessary framework. So, and also what India is doing, how much commitment India has done with respect to this Glasgow Climate Pact. Then the way forward as far as renewable energy, electric vehicles and other international initiatives are concerned. And to start with, as I mentioned, Glasgow Climate Pact happened in COP26 in first week of December in 2021. November and last week of November and first week of December in 2021. You can see it built on signatory countries, signatory countries that are having it built on signatory countries climate ambitions from the Paris Agreement which happened in 2015 and set out new rules to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. So, as we understand in Paris Agreement, we discussed and we agreed that we means the whole of 196 countries who are the signatory to that agreed that we will retain the temperature rise by 2 degree and we will try to reduce by 1.5 degree. And we know now that the way we are moving are called the BIO scenario with little bit of agreements and means commitment targets as far as the climate policy is concerned. Probably the world will receive a temperature rise of 2.6 to 2.7 degree centigrade by end of this century. So, these are the goals what has been set. So, including phasing down coal and establishing a global carbon market. So, coal, that means the fossil fuel has to be, the fossil fuel utilization has to be totally phased out because it emits lot of carbon dioxide and that is how it contributes to greenhouse gas emission. And also a good carbon or a well established global carbon market needs to be established so as to realize the money flow and its implementation towards the carbon towards the climate change adaptation and mitigation, towards arresting the temperature rise as far as the Paris Agreement is concerned. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the 5-year review of the NDC under the Paris Agreement was pushed back to November 2021 as part of the COP26 summit in Glasgow in UK. I just mentioned the Glasgow Climate Pact is described as a series of decisions and resolutions that build on Paris Accord. So, lot of things has been discussed and decisions resolution has been accepted. So, that is how this Glasgow Climate Pact into COP26 happened in the year 2021. It sets out what needs to be done to tackle the climate change by the NDCs, individual nations through their NDC, nationally determined contributions. It is the contribution individual nation determines. So, that is why it is named accordingly, nationally determined contributions to tackle the climate change, to arrest the greenhouse gas emission, CO2 equivalent emission. So, that is how Glasgow's breaking agenda is it's a potentially important development which emerged out of the COP26 is the Glasgow breakthrough agenda endorsed by 42 countries including India. So, this agenda has been ratified or endorsed by 42 countries including India. This is a cooperative effort to accelerate the development and deployment of clean technologies and sustainable solutions in areas such as clean power, road transport, steel and hydrogen. So, many places if we replace with these technologies, particularly in the sector of power, transport, steel with hydrogen and many other alternate or we say renewable energy sources, then perhaps we can very well achieve the target. So, that is what are mentioned or discussed in this Glasgow Climate Pact. So, let us have a look at the framework. The Glasgow Climate Pact includes specific decisions on three aspects. One is science and urgency, second is the adaptation, and third is the loss and damage and mitigation. So, what we in terms of this connected diagram, we can see that it has mitigation. So, as far as the ratchet mechanism is concerned, which is binding or which is coming from various NDCs, nationally determined contributions. The fossil fuels phase down the coal or the coal usage, that means not or non-use of non-renewable energy sources. Then adaptation. So, we achieve or we need to achieve a kind of, to achieve it we need double finance in terms of international support and also national and local support. Finance also has been committed that up to 100 billion USD fund or the kind of seed fund has to be generated, and it should increase every year, so that it can be spent on bringing out the various adaptation and mitigation measures that will perhaps arrest the temperature rise by 1.5 or 2 degrees centigrade. Then the fifth one is the loss and damage. So, all dialogues have been opened and people have discussed that the parties, the leaders, the negotiators, they discussed about the funding mechanism as far as various losses and damages that incur out of the climate related extreme weather events or natural disasters. So, annual review, it has been discussed and agreed upon that and there has to be a annual review, annual scale, and also cumulatively a 5-year target or half decadal review also has been discussed, and update plans for every year. So, the update plan says that the target has to increase. That means, if this year it is 18%, next year it has to be more than 18% in comparison to the emission base layer of 1990. First year coal explicitly named in the COP. In Article 6, as far as adaptation is concerned, the Paris rule book was finalized. In terms of post 2025 the goal, new target process launched, and loss and damage in Santiago a kind of new network was operationalized. So, there are overarching goals: keep 1.5 degree centigrade temperature rise alive. Current pledge will take us to a warming level of 2.4 to 2.7 degree centigrade by end of this century. So, further ambition urgency is required. So, every year or every decade we should raise our target in terms of reducing the emission, so that we will achieve net zero emission. The side pledges, what are the side pledges that are captured under the Glasgow Climate Pact? So, the side pledges are deforestation, methane pledge, US-China joint declaration. So, lot of these are the pledges which has been taken outside the formal Glasgow Climate Pact. So, these all also enhances in terms of reducing the emission towards achieving net zero target. Now, let us see all these different sections as far as the pact is concerned, climate pact is concerned. The first of them is mitigation and the NDC as far as the ratchet mechanism. So, the Glasgow Agreement has emphasized that stronger action in the current decade was most critical to achieving 1.5 degree target. For the first time in the UNFCCC process, there is a reference to phasing down unabated coal power and phasing out inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. It has asked countries to strengthen their 2030 climate action plans or NDCs by next year. Under this, it has established a work program to urgently scale up mitigation ambition and implementation. The most concrete achievement in Glasgow was that the signatory countries agreed to revise and strengthen their 2030 target to bring them in line with temperature target of the Paris Agreement. We all know the temperature target of 1.5 degree centigrade. Under this, it has asked countries to make efforts to reduce usage of coal as a source of fuel and abolish inefficient subsidies on fossil fuel. So, to reduce the coal or fossil fuel usage, all inefficient subsidies has to be banned or has to be dropped. This also has called for a phase down of coal and phase out of fossil fuels in general. So, gradually or periodically the usage of coal has to be stopped, phased out, including all other fossil fuels. Coming to the second is adaptation. Most of the countries, especially the smaller and the poorer ones and the small island states, they consider adaptation to be most important component of climate action. The Glasgow Climate Pact has asked the developed countries to at least double the money that is being provided for adaptation by 2025. So, it is important to have good assured money flow that can be utilized in climate change adaptation. So, this doubling has to be in comparison to the 2019 level because to achieve the target. Developing countries have been demanding that at least half of all climate finance should be directed towards adaptation efforts. So, developing countries, they say that half of the total climate finance should be diverted towards adaptation efforts, but declaration or decision have not been taken, but that is a demand from the developing countries. There has been a collective commitment to double the adaptation finance against a 2019 baseline, and it is significant. That was a significant outcome. Over the course of the conference, the parties committed 356 million to the adaptation fund and more than tripling and the 116 million it raised a year ago. That is a breaking news in terms of mobilizing the record. So, there has been a consensus to increase the fund. So, 356 million and tripling the 116 million which was agreed 1 year before in the COP25. And as far as this adaptation is concerned, it was agreed to create a 2-year work program to define the global goal on adaptation, and this agreement has a global goal on mitigation also. So, to reduce the greenhouse gas emission deep enough to keep temperature rise within 2 degrees centigrade as far as in comparison to the pre-industrial times. So, in adaptation, there are no uniform global criteria against which adaptation targets can be set and measured. Let us move on the third one, which talks about the phasing down of the coal. And the fourth one is with respect to climate finance and the 100 billion USD as far as the seed or the fund money or the fund, climate fund finance. So, the fossil fuels phasing down completely as far as coal is concerned and other fossil fuel. First time United Nations climate talks explicitly targeted fossil fuels, particularly coal, oil, gas. These are the major drivers of global warming. And the key decisions are in terms of Glasgow Pact are phasing down of unabated coal power, phase out of inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. The critical shift in language. So, earlier we are talking in terms of phase out, now it has been shifted to phase down, completely stop. So, driven by coal dependent countries in terms of India and China also. So, India and China, they are heavily dependent on coal, but this also shift has also been agreed and driven by these countries, particularly from phasing out to phasing down. So, it matters because we need ambitious action, and also the additional focus is we need to scale up the clean energy and energy efficiency to ensure not just fair but energy transition. So, the fourth one is with respect to the climate finance and the 100 billion goal that has been set. Climate action needs trillions of money per year. That means there still exists a gap in the finance or gap in the funding mechanism. So, 100 billion goal since 2020 has been regularly being delayed for years together, finally reached around 2023, which has been a late delivery. So, it has finally reached around 2023, 3 years or more than 2 years before. The key issues in terms of these delays, finance still is insufficient and uneven. We have been discussing this again and again that there is a gap in terms of the finance what is now available and what is required. So, developing countries demand more support and accountability also. And as far as this Glasgow Pact on COP26 is concerned, it urged delivery of 100 billion at an annual scale till 2025 and called for transparency in funding plan. So, there has to be transparency as far as the funding mechanism is concerned. So, post 2025, new climate goals under discussion focus on shifting the trillion of the dollars towards operationalizing the alignment in terms of financial flows with low emission, climate resilient and development pathways. So, now it is 100 billion, but post 2025 this year onwards, 26 onwards, the target is still more. It has been set to the tune of trillion scale, 1.1 trillion per year in terms of $1 trillion requirement to spend on climate mitigation and adaptation sectors. Move on to the fifth one that talks about loss and damage, and the sixth one is talking about the carbon market. As far as the loss and damage is considered, climate change already causing irreversible loss and damage. Extreme events, particularly this slow onset and sea level rise, droughts, cyclones, all these things. This refers to compensation support for vulnerable nations like India and other developing and underdeveloped countries from the developed countries. So, the key problem, no strong institutional funding mechanism, high financial implication in term, but there has been a hesitation at a global scale. And moving on, introduced at Warsaw 2013, and this Glasgow outcome, in Glasgow a good outcome has happened. These people, the 42 nations who then in Glasgow, they agreed only on a Glasgow dialogue for funding arrangement, focus on technical assistance, but not direct compensation. So, at least one outcome is the nations agreed to go for technical assistance, to provide technical assistance. Now, moving on, as far as the carbon market is concerned, enable trading of emission reductions, carbon trading or carbon credits, and Kyoto Protocol already has expired, Paris Agreement market still developing, and As far as the COP26 is concerned, it allowed use of old credits for first NDC target, and moving on to the four various aspects you see of the Glasgow Climate Pact is concerned. We have the adaptation, mitigation, loss and damage, and science and urgency, and these four aspects, they are do aim at helping to ensure that the collective progress towards limiting the temperature rise can be monitored more effectively, and also encourage further action and ambition where it is required. So, this is one of the most important outcomes of COP26 that was meanwhile an agreed upon transparency framework. This is the method in which countries report the track progress towards NDC, nationally determined contributions, including their greenhouse gas emissions, following methods that are documented in 2006 IPCC guidelines for national greenhouse gas inventories, and also in 2019 refinement. So, look at this, at the center we have a graphical representation of how IPCC assessments are reflected in Glasgow Climate Pact. So, IPCC assessments are truly reflected in the Glasgow Climate Pact. So, in terms of loss and gains, we acknowledge that climate change has already caused and will continue to cause loss and damage to properties. In terms of the science urgency, the IPCC express alarm and utmost concern that human activities have caused 1.1 degree centigrade of global warming. And also science and urgency, it welcomes the contributions of working group 1 to the IPCC panel as far as the understanding of the climate physics is concerned. And coming to the third component is that IPCC recognizes the importance of the best available science and effective climate action and policy making. Similarly, we have adaptation and mitigation. As far as the adaptation is concerned, IPCC calls upon the research community to further understanding of the global regional impacts of climate change. And also IPCC invites the findings from working group 2, including those relevant to assess adaptation records. And also IPCC notes that with serious concern from the findings from working group 1, including that the climate and weather extremes and adverse impacts of people and nature will continue to increase with every additional increment in terms of temperature rise. So, as far as mitigation is concerned, IPCC recognizes that we need to act to arrest the carbon dioxide equivalent or the emission of CO2 equivalent emissions, so that the temperature rise will be arrested by 2 degrees centigrade. So, IPCC recognizes this, and also that the impact of climate change will be much lower, the temperature increase in terms of 1.5 to 5 compared to 2 degrees centigrade, and also calls upon parties to accelerate the development, deployment and dissemination of technologies and adaptation. So, this is what is reflected, or how IPCC assessments are reflected in the Glasgow Climate Pact. It is really interesting to note that IPCC assessments are very well reflected in the Glasgow Climate Pact happened in COP26. So, what India, as far as India's contribution or India's NDC, nationally determined contribution is concerned, our PM Mr. Modi announced a 5-step plan that is in his words called Panchamrit. So, at the 26th COP, so to accomplish all this, to accomplish what? To accomplish the net zero emission and the target by 2070. So, India declared and how do you say agreed on these 5 points. So, we say India's 5-point pledge on Panchamrit. India agreed to reach 500 gigawatt non-fossil energy capacity by 2030 by end of this decade. 50% of its energy requirement from renewable energy by 2030. Reduction of total projected carbon emissions by 1 billion tons from now to 2030. Reduction of the carbon intensity of the economy by 45% by 2030 over 2005 levels, and achieving all this target of net zero emission by 2070. So, India has committed to achieve net zero by 2070, much little beyond 2050, but much before end of this decade, end of this century, that is 2100. So, coal based power and India. So, India has made no commitments regarding phasing down of coal based power. However, India's renewable energy goal 2030 are likely to reduce share of same from current 72% to about 50% by 2030 or end of this decade. So, as far as the electric vehicles or EVs are concerned, India's net zero by 2070 also requires phasing out petrol and diesel in transport and thereby shifting to EV use or electric vehicles that use electricity from renewable sources. And so, based on this Panchamrit, we have these 6 points as far as the way forward as far as India or the nation is concerned. India's renewable energy capacity is 4th in the world as of now and is growing at a very rapid pace. India has seen an increase of about 25% in renewable energy capacity in just last 4 years. 25% increase is really notable progress. India's railway sector, which is one of the largest emitter, has promised to achieve net zero by end of this decade. So, this alone will reduce 60 million tons of emissions. The 4th is India has launched international institutions for climate action such as International Solar Alliances, ISA, and also CDRI, that is Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. And India is also using an ecosystem based strategy to put policy into practice such as FAME India programs. FAME India program is very important as far as it aims at putting policy into practices. India along with the UK and Australia has launched the Infrastructure for Resilient Islands IRIS. So, Infrastructure for Resilient Island States has been launched by India, UK and Australia for the island nations and the developing countries to support them to realize the adaptation and mitigation targets or efforts as far as the climate change is concerned. And to summarize, we discussed about the Glasgow climate points, emission reduction plan, phasing down of coal and climate financing. So, on the upper right hand side you can see big emission cuts still needed to limit warming to 1.5 degree centigrade. So, projected greenhouse gas emissions in 2030 gigatons, before COP 52.4 gigatons. Pledge gets us to 41.9 gigaton, but we are a long way to meet the target of bringing it down to 26.6 gigatons by the end of 2030. So, we need to continue working to realize this goal in terms of emitting below 26.6 gigatons of CO2 equivalent by end of this decade. And we have taken help of these references to prepare the study material, and moving on to the conclusions. Let us conclude. We discussed about the Glasgow Pact, which is marked by critical step forward, especially in three things: strengthening NDC commitments, recognizing fossil fuel phase down, coal phase down instead of phasing out, advancing the carbon market rules, and still gap is there in terms of realization of 1.5 degree centigrade pathway. Finance market or climate finance is still inadequate, and also we still have weak commitments on loss and damage, which is because of the climate related disasters or extreme weather events. So, we still need to work on, but these are the major gaps as far as the COP26 or the Glasgow Pact is concerned. Thank you very much, and we leave you here for today.